So today I'm going to talk about agreement. And if you look from the perspective of the generative syntax, agreement and long-distance dependencies, agreement and movement are kind of two major syntactic operations. But I chose agreement and long-distance dependencies not only because of that, but also because currently we are doing some work on agreement with actually some people who are sitting in the audience. So first I will talk about other people's work and then about the experiments we are doing. So the talk will revolve around the phenomenon of agreement attraction. So first of all, let me explain what agreement attraction is. It was noted already at the end of the 19th century that there is a type of mistake that occurs really frequently in English. So the mistake is exemplified here on the slides. The path to the monuments are littered with bottles. So the verb are, instead of agreeing with the main noun in the subject phrase, with the head of the subject phrase, it agrees with the noun phrase that depends on this head noun. So instead of agreeing with the word path, the verb agrees with the word monuments. So, and these mistakes, they are found in large numbers in corpora, and they also frequently occur in colloquial speech, and you can see them even in well-edited texts, and so on and so forth. And starting from the 90s, there were a lot of experiments on these mistakes. So, and the same pattern, the same type of mistakes was also found in many other languages, including German, Dutch, French, Italian, Spanish, Slovak, Slovenian, and some others, and Russian too. So I will come back to that closer to the end of the talk. There are studies on Russian done by Olga Fedorova, Igor Yanovich, and some other people. So these mistakes occur not only in this construction that I have just demonstrated, when you have a subject-noun phrase, a dependent phrase inside it, and the verb. They also occur in other constructions, and one of these constructions is exemplified on the slide. The hypothesis, one, entertain, influence visual information search. So in this case, the verb inside an embedded clause that modifies the subject, it agrees with the thing it modifies and not with the subject of the embedded clause. And again, these mistakes were very well studied both in the corpora and in experimental research. And what's also interesting, that people fail to notice the same mistakes in comprehension that tend to arise in production. And this is known again since the 90s. So why are these mistakes interesting? So why is this so-called agreement attraction attractive for us as linguists? Because these mistakes give us a chance to learn how grammatical processes work in real time. So take any syntactic theory, and agreement will be one of the very crucial processes in it. Then they also, as I will show you, they also tell us a lot about how features are represented in our mental grammar. So say there are these plural and singular features. So how are they represented in our mental grammar so that these mistakes become possible? And this phenomenon is especially valuable for studying production, because we have lots of techniques to study comprehension. We can study like reading, eye movement patterns. We can study like different, we have different brain imaging techniques. But for production, the range of the available experimental techniques is rather limited. more or less because in comprehension we can trace rather precisely what like the participants of your experiment hear or see right at this moment. In production we know that we somehow go from meaning to text, but very often until we actually have this text, I mean spoken text or written text, we do not know how the process develops. And so errors allow us allow us to see how the process might be developing in real time. And so errors are one of the few windows into these things. So, and of course, like I will be talking exclusively about experimental studies, but of course this does not undermine the importance of corpus studies. So the only thing that is better about experimental studies is that they're better suited for teasing different potentially relevant factors apart. So you can present people with stimuli that are minimally different, and the difference is exactly in the factor you're interested in. Of course, it's extremely interesting to see what kind of errors arise in naturally occurring like speech or written texts. But you can't do that. You can't find like examples that are minimally different exactly in the factor that you're interested in. I mean, you can maybe sometimes, but usually it's impossible. So what are the experimental techniques that are used to study these agreement attraction errors? In production, there are two like main techniques. So first, in some experiments, participants are presented with subject phrases. For example, they're given phrases like the key to the cabinets, and then they're asked to complete the sentence. Say, I give you a phrase, the key to the cabinets, and whatever sentence you can come up with using this thing as the subject. Say, the key to the cabinets is rusty, for example. Yeah, whatever. And the second technique is as follows. So participants are first presented with a predicate. For example, was rusty or were rusty, or to be rusty, depending, like different authors use slightly different methods. And then with the subject phrase that does not always agree with this predicate. And they're asked to combine these two things in one sentence. For example, I tell you first to be rusty, and then the key to the cabinets, and you are supposed to utter something like the key to the cabinets was rusty. Yeah, I was actually going to make this agreement attraction error that I'm talking about, so I was going to say for rusty. So, and of course, then you can count the number of errors that occur in different experimental conditions. So, for example, you can take a phrase like the key to the cabinets and the key to the cabinet with this dependent noun in singular, and see whether having the dependent noun in plural actually increases the number of mistakes that people produce. And we know for sure now from many languages that it does increase the number of mistakes in a very substantial way. So, and in comprehension, when people try to see whether these mistakes actually, people tend to notice them less in comprehension. In comprehension, classical techniques are used, like self-paced reading studies, and a localized time difference was detected. So, if you have a sentence like the key singular to the cabinet singular were rusty, wrong agreement on the verb, people notice this mistake immediately, and there is a large delay in reading times compared to the correct sentence. And if you have a sentence like the key singular to the cabinets plural were rusty, then the delay compared to the correct sentence is much less pronounced. And like in many studies, they show that it starts later in reading. Again, you can show the same thing in EEG studies. And also, at least like in some languages, at least say in English, it shows up in acceptability judgments too. So actually, yeah, I'm not sure whether you can show this, for example, for Russian. But at least for English, it was demonstrated that people, when they see mistakes like the key singular to the cabinets plural were rusty, they perceive these sentences as, so to say, less bad than mistakes without agreement attraction, like the key singular to the cabinet singular were rusty. So, yeah, as I said, there were a lot of experiments on these mistakes. So I'm going to talk about some important factors that were identified in these experiments. And we'll try to speculate a little bit what this tells us about how agreement works in real time and how features are represented. So the first thing that was reliably detected in all studies and all studied languages is the so-called plural markedness effect. So there are more mistakes in the sentences like one on the slide than in the sentences like two on the slide. So when you have the head of the subject phrase in singular and this dependent word, let's call it attractor, this dependent word in plural, you have a lot of mistakes in production, and these mistakes are less visible in comprehension. While the opposite situation, when the head is in plural, the path, and the dependent noun, the monument, is in singular, people found very few mistakes on the verb when the verb is singular. And again, these mistakes are more noticeable when you read the sentence. So what does it tell us about the number feature? It tells us that two values of the number feature, singular and plural, are somehow different in our mental grammar. And actually, then let's try to speculate what the difference is. So the opinion that most authors that work on these agreement errors share is that most of them just treat the number feature as privative. So they think that plural, that singular is like a zero, while plural is I'm sorry. They think that singular is a zero and plural is marked. So singular feature more or less is non-existent, and plural is something that you put on the verb. And then this explains. This is a way to explain why plural is marked, behaves as marked, and singular doesn't. But actually, if we think about the number feature, we will see that there are many possible explanations. First, let's look at frequency. You will see that singular is more frequent, plural is less frequent. Let's look at the studies of cognitive complexity of different features of different grammatical categories. You will see that people say that singular is less complex cognitively, plural is more complex. Let's look at morphology. At least in English, singular is morphologically unmarked, plural is marked. And actually, like whatever property we take, we will see that singular is unmarked according to this property and plural is marked. So, of course, to investigate what this plural markedness effect is really about, it would be great to look at other features. And this is what we are doing here with Anton Malko, who is sitting in the audience. We tried to look at gender in Russian. Because as I will show you a little bit later, with gender it's, with gender in Russian, the picture is more complex. So say neuter gender is the least frequent, but it is used, say, in default agreement. So if we have sentences like it rains in Russian, or it snows, it freezes, they will have neuter agreement on the verb. So, and then when we look at gender agreement errors, we can actually try to tease these factors apart and to see which of the factors actually matters for these things. And from that, we can make some inferences about how features are represented in the mental grammar. Yeah, this shows you the number of different errors from a famous series of experiments by Eberhard and colleagues. So you can see that you have a noticeable number of mistakes when the head is singular and the dependent noun is plural, and everything else, there are no statistically significant differences. So singular, singular, plural, 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 singular. Yeah, you have much less errors. Then another important factor that people were able to establish is that what matters for these agreement errors is the syntactic structure and not the linear order. So initially, when these mistakes were first noticed, people thought, it's very simple. They happen because you first have the subject in singular, then you have this dependent noun and the verb. And the verb just agrees with the noun that is closer to it. So it's a very similar, it's a very simple linear effect. But actually, when psycholinguists started investigating this phenomenon, they found that it's not the case. That the phenomenon does not depend on linear proximity, it depends on structure. So, for example, in one study, they found that there are more mistakes in the sentences like 3 than in the sentences like 4. So, although the noun doors in these examples is closer, is further away from the verb than the noun toilets in example 4, it induces more mistakes in production. Why so? Because actually the noun doors is structurally closer to the head of the subject phrase. So then, in another study by Vilyoko and Nicol, they saw that there is no difference with respect to agreement errors between sentences like 5 and 6. 5, our helicopter for the flights safe, and 6, the helicopter for the flights are safe. So you can see that in the sentence 5, the verb is not even, this attractor, it's not even in between the subject and the verb. First you have the verb, then you have the head of the subject-noun phrase, and then you have the attractor. And still you have as many mistakes as in the sentences like 6, and when you read the sentences, they're equal to. So why is this the case? Because actually if you look at the syntactic structure of the sentences like 5, you will see that like in this syntactic structure, the verb originates lower. And then, depending on your syntactic theory, you can say that it moves or that there is a dependency or something else. But actually, it originates lower, below the subject phrase and below the dependent noun flights. So this shows that it's not a linear effect, it's a structural effect. Does linear distance matter at all? Actually, here, different studies gave slightly different results. So some studies show that, there are some linear distance effects too. They're much less pronounced than structural effects. And some studies show no reliable linear distance effects at all. But what is absolutely sure is that they're very small compared to the effects of to the role of the syntactic structure. Probably I'll skip that. Then semantic factors were also examined. And here different studies gave slightly different results. So there was this big question whether distributivity plays a role. So for example, if you look at the sentence like 7, that starts with, it's not a sentence, it's a subject phrase. So if you look at the subject phrase in 7, the baby on the blankets. The most kind of prominent interpretation you get is that there is a heap of blankets and the baby is sitting on the top of them. And if you hear a subject phrase like in A, the label on the bottles, the most prominent interpretation is distributive, meaning that there are a lot of bottles and there is not one label that is kind of glued on top of all these bottles, but that there is one label per bottle. And so in most studies, these played a role. So there were more mistakes with the subject phrases like the ones in 8, like the one in 8, and less mistakes with the subject phrases like in 7. But in some studies there was no significant difference. So in this first study that actually launched this whole field of agreement attraction experiments, so in this classical study by Bock and Miller, they didn't find any difference. So distributivity didn't play any role there. Then some studies show that semantic integration between the two noun phrases, the head of the subject phrase and the dependent element, is important. So, for example, in one study showed that there are more mistakes in the sentences like 9 than in the sentences like 10. So 9, the pizza with the yummy toppings, the toppings are actually part of the pizza. So it's one object. And in 10, the pizza with the tasty beverages, so you have, hopefully you have your pizza separately and your beverages on top of your pizza, but as a separate thing. So another thing that was shown to play a role in some studies, but not in the others, is how well the intervener combines with the verb. Say a study by Thornton and MacDonald demonstrated that sentences like 12 are read faster than sentences like 11. So in 12 we have the letter from the professors were praised, and in 11 we have the letter from the professors were burned. So if you try to combine the verb phrase in 12 with the professors, with this attractor, you can say that professors are actually prone to praise people. But if you try to combine the verb, to praise people or to be praised, and if you try to combine the verb from 11 with the attractor, with the professors, usually you do not see, fortunately, professors burning somebody or burning themselves. However, in some other studies, there were no reliable differences depending on this factor, on how well the verb combines with the potential intervener. So, for example, a study by Eileen Lau and colleagues, they looked at the following sets of sentences. So, the phone by the toilets was, or were, with the agreement attraction mistakes, what Roberta, and then they had the verb used that combines well both with the phones and the toilets, dialed, something that combines only with the phones well, flushed, something that combines only with the toilets well, and embarrassed, the verb that doesn't combine with anything in a reasonable way. And they found no reliable differences between these conditions. And I just made like a selection of things that I thought are the most interesting, but actually many other things were studied on the example of these agreement attraction mistakes. Probably, what I should comment on here, what I haven't done, is that here, when people were looking at these things, and when they were looking at distributivity here and that semantic integration here, the question that they were trying to answer was, is it just a formal mistake? Or does it influence kind of the resulting interpretation of the sentence? So in production, we probably know what we want to say, so we probably want to say that this mistake has nothing to do with the interpretation. But when we do not notice these mistakes in comprehension, does it play any role for the resulting interpretation of the sentence? So most authors would say no, it's just a formal mistake. And so, and if you try to capitalize on this fact, they try to say that it shows that like different, like parts of like of our language processing system work separately, so they're more isolated. And some people who would want to say that when you do not notice such a mistake, it plays a role for interpretation, they sometimes would use this fact to show that there is more integration and feed-forward and feedback processes going on between these different components. So then as I said, many other things have been studied in connection with these attraction errors. For example, that there are less mistakes with pluralia tantum nouns than with normal nouns. So for example, if you take English words suds and bubbles, they mean approximately the same. But for bubbles you have one single bubble, and suds is always used in plural. So, and there are less mistakes with nouns, with attractors like suds than with attractors like bubbles. And yeah, I won't go into like other factors and other things that were studied with in connection with this agreement attraction effect. So I will add probably just one more thing that will be really important for our experiments later, and that is really important by itself. So the formal resemblance factor. So if you look at English, as we all know, is rather poor in morphology, and so there are no morphological cases. So if you look at a language like German, it has cases, and first in an experiment on German by Hartzauker and colleagues, and then in experiments on other languages, people established that there is a significant number of errors only in the sentences like 14. Yeah, it's a mistake on the slide. So in this sentence, that starts with die Stellungnahme gegen die Demonstrationen, this attractor die Demonstrationen is in accusative plural, and the form coincides with the nominative plural. And in 15, die Stellungnahme zu den Demonstrationen, the attractor den Demonstrationen is in dative plural, and this form does not coincide with the nominative plural. And you have much less mistakes in production, and they're more noticeable in comprehension. So more or less, if we put it informally, the attractor must look like a subject for agreement mistakes to be frequent in production and to be less noticeable in comprehension. And we will actually come back to that later in one of our experiments on Russian. So what we will come back to in particular is what does it mean to look like a subject. Because you can see that, here we cannot tease apart like that it formally, on the surface it looks like a subject. But it's also marked by, it's also in plural. And actually in Russian we have some forms that on the surface coincide with the nominative plural form, but are singular, like the form деревня. It can be genitive singular, it can be nominative plural, or it can be accusative plural. So in an experiment on Russian, we can see what will actually be more important: the formal resemblance or the number on the attractor. So then a couple of words on what actually goes wrong when agreement attraction happens. So where does the mistake arise? So is it about how the syntactic structure is represented, or about how the information is accessed? So if we assume that it's about the representation of the syntactic structure, then something of the following sort should happen. So yeah, it's here. So if we have this subject noun phrase, path to the monuments. So the monuments here are plural, the path is singular, and the whole noun phrase, the whole subject noun phrase should get its number specification from the head. From the, the head is a term, but we can say from the main noun in this noun phrase. And some authors actually argue that in some cases a mistake can occur, and then the whole subject noun phrase gets its number not from the head, but from a dependent element. Technically it's called feature percolation, but it's not important for us because the picture is clear without any kind of special terms or ideas. So this is the correct thing, and this is how many authors think that agreement attraction mistakes happen. Yeah, so this is what happens in production, and when you do not notice this thing in comprehension, they would actually say that you construe the subject noun phrase in the wrong way. So you make this mistake when you construe the subject noun phrase in comprehension. So when the verb arrives in plural, you think, yeah, this is exactly what I expected, because you made a mistake with the subject in the first place. A different point of view is that the subject noun phrase is always constructed correctly, both in production and in comprehension, but the mistake happens when we try to access information inside this subject noun phrase. So I will first show how this approach predicts mistakes in comprehension, and then we'll explain how it applies to production. So we constructed this subject noun phrase correctly. So this is singular, the head is singular, and the whole noun phrase is singular. And so we predict, when we are reading or listening, we predict singular agreement on the verb. But then the verb all of a sudden arrives in plural. What do? We see that something is going wrong. So we recheck. Why? And actually, since this whole subject noun phrase is active at the moment, if there is something that can interfere with this checking process inside it, we can make a mistake. And say, okay, the verb should have been in singular. Why is it in plural? Because there is this monuments phrase in there. So yeah, it's okay. Let's go on with our comprehension process. So this part, this approach to agreement attraction mistakes actually assumes that the mistake happens during this rechecking process. How can we tease these two approaches apart? If the mistake happens like this, if we can actually misrepresent the number on the subject noun phrase, then first we expect grammaticality illusions. So we made this mistake, the verb arrives in plural, we say, okay, this is exactly what we expected. But say we made this mistake and the verb correctly arrives in singular. then we should expect to have ungrammaticality illusions. When we say, yeah, the verb is in singular, but we expect plural here. So in this approach, we expect both grammaticality illusions and ungrammaticality illusions. In this approach, where we make the mistake while we access information during rechecking, we predict only grammaticality illusions. So is this clear? Because this is probably the most kind of structurally complicated part. Yeah, so if there are no answers, no questions, I will assume that this is clear. So, do we actually have ungrammaticality illusions? Some authors claim that we do. It's a question that is undecided so far. So, some authors claim that we do have ungrammaticality illusions. So, let's compare these sentences in 16 through 19. So, the sentence. These authors in different experiments demonstrated that the sentences like 19 are read faster than the sentences like in 17. So in 19 we have something like the key to the cabinets were rusty. So this agreement attraction mistake when we have the verb in the wrong form, in plural instead of singular. But we notice this mistake later. And its effect is smaller because there is this intervening noun cabinets. And this can be compared to the case when cabinet is in singular and there is no attraction phenomenon here. So 19 is read faster than 17. And this is what we call a grammaticality illusion. And these authors also claim that sentences like 18 are read slower on average than sentences like 16. So in 18 we have the head of the subject noun phrase in singular, the intervening noun, the dependent noun in plural, and the correct singular agreement on the verb. And in 16 everything is in singular. So the head of the subject noun phrase is in singular, the dependent noun phrase is in singular, and the verb is correctly in singular. And so these authors claim that sentences like 18 are read slower than sentences like 16, and this is what ungrammaticality illusion would give us. So it would mean that in some cases we incorrectly assign plural to this whole subject noun phrase, and this is why we expect the verb in plural instead of correctly expecting it to come in singular. But some other authors, and say Matthew Wagers and his colleagues in this 2009 paper, they think that a lot of the reported cases of ungrammaticality illusions can actually be, are actually explained by other factors if we look at the data in more detail. So to show, to prove their point, they first suggest us to look at the sentence without any attraction. So let's look at the following sentence. The old key, unsurprisingly, was rusty from years of disuse. This is a correct sentence. And then let's make a mistake here, putting were in here. And then let's look at another sentence in plural. The old keys, unsurprisingly, were rusty from years of disuse. And then let's make a mistake here and use was here. So what they show in a reading time experiment is that actually plural here has an additional cost that is absolutely independent from the cost incurred by processing a violation. So these two sentences are the sentences without any mistake in singular. These two sentences are with the key in singular, with mistake and without mistake. And these two sentences are with the keys in plural, with mistake and without mistake. So you see that the sentences in plural at this stage, at the initial stage, take more time just because of plural. So plural takes a little bit longer. And then at the following stage, you have two correct sentences here, in singular and in plural, so the key was and the keys were, and two incorrect sentences up here, key were and keys was. So, and then they look at these agreement attraction cases with possible grammaticality and ingrammaticality illusions, and they show that if you separate this effect or this additional cost of processing plurals by inserting, say, an adverb between the attractor and the verb, then the ingrammaticality illusion goes away. So this is the grammaticality illusion, and all other sentences are statistically the same. There is no significant difference. And this is the effect of processing plural, and it can be, in this experiment, because we have this adverb in the middle, it can be separated. As Matthew Wagers and colleagues note correctly, it's not clear whether all reported ingrammaticality effects can be explained away in this manner. So the question is still open, and both theories are kind of still, none of them got killed so far. Yeah, we don't know yet which one is the correct one. So then let me turn to the experiments that we conducted here in St. Petersburg. And before I do that, maybe if somebody has any questions about this first part, yeah, you can ask later after the talk, but if you have some questions now, I would be happy to answer. No. Then let me go to the experiments we are doing here. So who is we? Who is us? Me, Natalia Слюсарь, then Anton Malko, sitting here in the audience, Natalia Череповская, who also works in our laboratory for cognitive studies, but who is not here, and Yulia Vakulenko, who is also sitting here in the audience. And what do? We look at number, gender, and case agreement in Russian. So first let me mention that there are some experiments on Russian looking at agreement attraction by Laurie Moore and colleagues, by Wilson and Nickel, and by Olga Fedorova and different people who work with her. So like Igor Yanovich and some other students of hers. They all focused on number agreement in Russian, and they demonstrated that in Russian, like in other languages that were studied in this respect, there is number agreement attraction. You can see it in, they looked at production, so they saw that it induces more mistakes in production. And they also demonstrated that plural markedness effect also is present in Russian as in other languages that were studied. And there were also some corpus studies on Russian, but they showed that, they only found case mistakes. They do not report any number or gender agreement attraction mistakes. So to get some background for the first study that I am going to report on, let's come back to the markedness effects. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you look at the plural markedness effect, most authors tend to explain it by what's called representational markedness. Meaning that either number is a privative feature, singular is nothing and plural is something that you put on the noun, or they do it in a slightly different way, saying that singular is the default value of the number feature and plural is the non-default value. And so this is why more or less plural is visible both in production and in comprehension, it's visible in the structure. And this is why it can interfere with things. While singular is just less visible, or you can say not visible if it's a zero. So this is why it cannot interfere with any processes. So this is why plural induces more mistakes in production, makes mistakes less visible in comprehension, and singular attractors do not do anything statistically significant. But actually, as I mentioned, singular is also used as grammatical default. In impersonal sentences, for example, singular is also more frequent, less cognitively complex, etc., etc. So, what factor does actually matter? So, a way to test this would be to look at other features, and in particular at gender, especially, say, in a language like Russian, which has 3 genders. And so it stops being a binary comparison. If we look at gender in Russian, so frequency facts. Frequency facts are as follows. So masculine is the most frequent, then comes feminine, and then comes neuter. So neuter is actually dramatically less frequent than masculine and feminine are. But if you look at the grammatical default, then neuter is used in impersonal sentences. But in case of gender conflicts, for example, in the sentences like the man and the woman each, in these cases we use masculine. Also, if we combine masculine and neuter, some people say that the sentence with each becomes ungrammatical, but those people who consider these sentences grammatical at all, they use masculine. So the situation with grammatical default is complex in Russian, in case of gender. So the first question would be to ask whether there are any attraction errors in this situation at all. So maybe if singular is 0 and plural is something, you get agreement attraction, and maybe if all 3 genders are some non-zero features, we will not have any agreement attraction at all. And the second question, if there is agreement attraction, are there any markedness effects? So are there any studies on gender out there? Yes, so there were several studies that reported no gender agreement errors. But then there was a study on Slovak by Badeker and Kuminyak, and they used sentence completion method, and they did find attraction errors in gender agreement, and these errors did exhibit markedness effects. So to be brief, the outcome of their study was that feminine behaved as marked with respect to masculine and neuter, and masculine behaved as marked with respect to neuter. So to give you an idea what the study looked like, here are some examples of their stimuli from their first experiment. So they were comparing subject phrases like glass masculine for tea masculine, or glass masculine for milk neuter. And yeah, here are other conditions that they used in their first experiment, and in this first experiment, intervener nouns were all in accusative singular, and these accusative singular forms coincided with the nominative singular forms. So they did this obviously to boost the number of mistakes. In their second experiment, they additionally checked that this factor indeed matters for Slovak, and it does, as it matters for German, and as, say, Lorimer and colleagues show that it matters for Russian, and so on and so forth. So indeed, if the form of the intervener does not coincide with the nominative form, you get much less mistakes. So, and Slovak actually, yeah, Russian and Slovak are very similar in this part of the grammar. So they also have 3 genders, and they also have gender agreement on the verbs only in the past tense, and the situation is the same in Russian. So Badeker and Kuminyak used this classical method when you offer people noun phrases and ask them to use these phrases as subjects, completing sentences. And we used a slightly different technique when you offer people a predicate and then a noun phrase, the subject, and ask them to combine this predicate and subject in one sentence. So here are here are the numbers from Badeker and Kuminyak's experiment, but actually I already gave you their conclusions. So they showed that if you compare masculine and neuter, you get more mistakes with masculine attractors, and if you compare feminine and masculine, you get more mistakes with feminine attractors. And in the third experiment, they also directly compared feminine and neuter. And there are, as you can see, there is a considerable number of these attraction errors, and agreement errors without attraction also occurred in the experiment, but there were just 5 of them. And all these differences are statistically significant. Yeah, this is their other experiment. And if we go to the questions that we have after this study, the first question is, it's just one experiment on gender agreement attraction. So will this pattern be replicated? Will it be the same in other languages? In particular, will it be the same in Russian, that is quite similar in this part of the grammar? And what, based on these several experiments, what can we say about markings? So in our first experiment that we did with Anton Malko, we looked at, we more or less tried to replicate Badeker and Kuminyak's experiment with a different method. We used a different method because when we tried this sentence completion method, it didn't work well with our subjects for some reason. So we were first given predicates. For example, был просроченным was expired masculine, or была просроченной was expired feminine. And then subject phrases like рецепт на порошок, prescription masculine for powder masculine, or рецепт на мазь, prescription masculine for ointment feminine. And we counted how many mistakes people made combining the predicate and the subject in a complete sentence, depending on these gender mismatches. And in our experiment, let me mention that these dependent noun phrases always coincided with the nominative singular, and both the head of the subject noun phrase and the dependent noun phrase, they were in singular, not to give, not to investigate additionally the number factor here, so to focus on gender. So we had 48 stimuli, 100 fillers, 30 native speakers of Russian as participants. And what we got, the picture is, let me see. Let me first show it here. So the differences were less pronounced than in the Slovak study in our case. But when we compared feminine and masculine, we got, statistically speaking, the same result, that there are statistically significantly more mistakes with feminine attractors than with masculine attractors. And here, when we compared masculine and neuter, the difference was in the same, the tendency was the same as in the Slovak experiment, but this difference wasn't statistically significant in our study. So now, together with Anton, we are replicating another experiment from this Slovak study where neuter is directly compared with feminine and also is compared with masculine to see whether maybe this difference will be significant there, or whether we will again get the result that the differences between masculine and neuter are not significant. So if we try to explain this pattern, what seems to matter here is how features, not frequency for sure, because masculine is the most frequent, then comes feminine, and then neuter. But this correlates with what we see in the grammar, what is used as default. So as I mentioned, in Russian and in Slovak, neuter is used as default in impersonal sentences. In Russian, in case of gender conflict, masculine is used as default. And as far as I understand, in Slovak, the situation is more complex here. Yeah. So, let me repeat. Here are markedness effects in the Slovak experiment. Here are markedness effects we got so far in our first experiment. But what's more interesting here is that in a previous experiment on Russian, done by Igor Yanovich and Olga Fedorova, they noticed that the number attraction errors, so they didn't look at gender, they looked at number, but they found that number attraction errors depend on the gender of the head noun. And actually here you get a different hierarchy of these gender features. So they found they found a lot of mistakes with neuter heads, less mistakes in number, because they were looking at number, less mistakes in number with feminine heads, and even less mistakes in number with masculine heads. So what does this mean for us as psycholinguists and people who are interested in how these things are represented in the mental grammar and how agreement works in the mental grammar? This means preliminarily, and I will talk more on that in a second. Preliminarily, it means that there is no single markedness hierarchy. So initially, what we expected and what actually a lot of people writing on number are sure about, that there is this like single property of features that matters for the mental grammar. But actually here we see that different properties matter for different constructions and for different tasks. So it just turned out that for this type of construction and this type of task, frequency matters, because this hierarchy exactly correlates with the frequency of the three genders. And these things correlate with things like which feature is the grammatical default. And then both to see whether the effects will be probably I should first say that. So our second experiment that we did with Anton Malko was a comprehension experiment. So the Slovak study was a production study. Our first experiment was a production experiment replicating the Slovak experiment. And actually, so far, nobody looked at these three-member gender systems in comprehension with respect to agreement errors. So we did a self-paced reading study with 40 participants, and our target sentences had 8 or 9 words, and they all had the same type of structure. Noun, preposition, noun as the subject noun phrase. So this is the head noun, this is the preposition, this is the dependent noun, a potential attractor. Then the verb to be in the past tense, and then adjective or participle. It also shows, so the verb to be in the past tense in singular shows gender agreement, and the adjective or participle also shows gender agreement. And then there was a modifier that consisted of 3 to 4 words. So these sentences and the filler sentences were presented word by word in a self-paced reading experiment, meaning that the sentence first all appears masked with, say, hyphens. The subject presses the button, sees the first word, then presses the button again, the first word is masked, he or she sees the second word, and so on and so forth. So you can measure how much time the subject spent on reading every word. And so here is an example of our stimuli. So рецепт на порошок or на мазь. So prescription masculine for powder masculine or for ointment feminine. So we had either masculine, masculine, feminine, feminine, and so on sets, or the sets where this interference is possible. So say in this case masculine head and feminine dependent noun, potential attractor. And then we also had sentences with the verb in the correct form. Был измят, was crumpled, masculine, masculine. Or the verb in the wrong gender, была измята, so was feminine, crumpled, feminine. And then this modifier due to the patient's nervousness. So as you can see, if we have ointment here in feminine, we want to see how it influences processing of this mistake compared to the correct sentence and compared to the situation where we have masculine noun and not feminine noun here. So, and here I will, I will give the results very briefly, not, to have some time left for some other things. So before the production studies and reading studies of agreement attraction, the studies that focused on number, they always gave parallel results. What do I mean by parallel results? I mean that plural attractors induced more mistakes in production and were most disruptive for error detection in comprehension. And so, let me remind you that people try to explain it in the following way. Singular is, say, less visible. So this is why plural induces more mistakes in production and makes mistakes less visible in comprehension, because it interferes with this, either, depending on your theory, it either interferes with this rechecking process that you initiate when you encounter a verb in an unexpected form, or what syntacticians would say, it percolates. Meaning that if you have a plural in the dependent noun, then this plural is visible and active, and so it can get to the top of this structure, so it can mark the whole subject-noun phrase, while if you have this singular, if it's zero or if it's kind of default, it's less active in interfering. However, what we got in our first comprehension experiment is that masculine attractors are most disruptive for error detection in comprehension. Meaning that if you have this dependent noun phrase in masculine and say the head noun phrase in feminine, you notice the mistakes less and their effect is less pronounced. But if you have say the head noun phrase in masculine and the dependent noun phrase in feminine, this attraction effect is less significant, occurs. So the mistakes are more visible. And this is comprehension. If you remember, if you compare it to what we found in production and what the Slovak experiments showed in production feminine attractors induce most mistakes And in addition to that, we also found that masculine attractors are also least disruptive in grammatical sentences. So these are the results on the table, but probably it makes no sense to go over this table here, because yeah, if you'd like to, you can do this later at your leisure, but yeah, the upshot of the results is what's important here. So, so far, we have no good explanation for why this is the case, so I can only offer you our working hypothesis. So first, we of course checked that the frequency and the length of our attractors, or the gender on the verb and the adjective as an independent factor, not whether it's correct or not, they all do not influence our results. So given that, we hypothesized that in comprehension, masculine acts as unmarked, potentially due to its highest frequency. And therefore it serves as a better match to retrieval cues in this retrospective search that we initiate when we encounter an error. So yeah, that is initiated when an unexpected form is encountered in ungrammatical sentences. But at the same time, it's less disruptive to ongoing tracking of features that must be satisfied at the verb position when processing grammatical sequences. But we have no good explanation so far for this finding that if we look at number, masculine, if we look at number, plural is, yeah, most disruptive in production, most disruptive in comprehension, and if we look at gender, the results for production and comprehension are different. But this is the first comprehension experiment on gender agreement attraction. So, of course, we want to make some follow-up studies to see whether this effect survives and to try to understand what it can possibly mean. So, the second group of experiments that I wanted to introduce also briefly are our experiments on number. Actually, we have just one experiment completed so far. And to introduce it, let me come back to another observation that I made in this introductory part. So, let me remind you that formal resemblance of the attractor to the subject was found to be important. So a potential intervener, a potential attractor must look like a subject. So I showed you these two examples from German. So you get a lot of mistakes here, where the form of the attractor, accusative plural, coincides with the nominative plural, and you get much less mistakes here, where the attractor is in dative plural, and this form does not coincide with the nominative plural. And as I mentioned, like previous studies looked only at these accusative plural forms that coincide with the nominative plural, and at the forms that do not coincide with the nominative plural at all, like this dative plural thing. However, in Russian, we have forms like, say, деревни, from деревня, village, and this form деревни is homonymous between genitive singular, nominative plural, and accusative plural. And so what can we do with these forms? We already know that we have the largest number of mistakes in cases like one here. Билет на концерты, ticket singular, for concerts, plural, and this is in accusative plural, and this form coincides with the nominative plural. But what about examples 2 and 3? In 2 we have комната для вечеринки, room for party. And this form, party, is in genitive singular, and the preposition makes it like absolutely unambiguous that it's genitive singular. But this form coincides, and it's like this formal resemblance thing. It coincides with the nominative plural. And in the example in 3, комната для вечеринок, room for parties, room, nominative singular for, and the form parties is in genitive plural, and this form does not coincide with the nominative plural. So we were wondering where more mistakes will occur. In this case, in 2, where we have the formal resemblance factor, but the actual form is not a plural form, or here in 3, where the formal resemblance factor is absent, but yeah, the form is actually in plural. So if you remember like these theories of agreement attraction that I was showing before, they more or less say, yeah, they say nothing about this formal resemblance. So they explain how different features can or cannot percolate, how different features are or are not visible in this retrospective search. But on the top of that, people just added that it's good if this potential intervener looks like a subject, but then it wasn't really integrated into these theories. But what we were able to find in our experiment, and I will skip the details just to give you the result, that we have more mistakes here than here. Actually, we found quite a few mistakes in these cases, some mistakes in these cases, and no mistakes in these cases whatsoever. From some previous studies, say by Lorrimore and colleagues, we know that mistakes do occur with these structures in Russian, but they more or less tested like hundreds of subjects to elicit just very few mistakes. So we know that mistakes occur in these structures too, but in our experiment we had 30 subjects. So quite a few mistakes here, several mistakes here, no mistakes here. The differences between all 3 conditions are statistically significant. So this shows us that previously formulated approaches to agreement attraction should be somehow reformulated or modified, because say this approach that says that something happens when you construe the subject phrase, it says nothing about formal resemblance at all. It just says that some features can erroneously percolate up the structure, some features cannot. This doesn't explain what we see in here. The other approach that says that the mistake happens when we try to recheck, when say we have the subject, then in comprehension we come to the verb is in unexpected form, we want to recheck. And this approach was claiming that, for example, the verb is in plural, we recheck if there is an intervener in plural, we can mistakenly decide that the sentence is correct. And this is grammaticality effect. But what we see here actually shows us that probably what happens, probably it doesn't matter that much that the intervener is in plural, but what matters more is that this intervener on the surface looks like a nominative plural subject. And actually it tells us something I think very important about how these forms are represented in the syntactic structure when we produce a process. Because a lot of people would say that what the form looks on the surface doesn't matter at all. So there are a lot of theories that more or less separate syntax and morphology, and they would say that do your syntax first, and then spell out what you have got in your syntax, accessing lexicon and taking like different morphemes and stuff. So if you have this type of theory, you would not expect that what the form looks on the surface matters when you comprehend the sentence and when you produce a sentence. Because what is supposed to happen in production if you have this mistake while accessing information approach, you would expect that you construct your subject phrase first, and then when you come to the verb, you actually go back and try to see what number you should have on the verb. And usually you find the correct thing, you find the head of the subject noun phrase and look at the number on this head of the subject noun phrase, but you can also erroneously find some other noun phrase and take the number from this other noun phrase. But what we see here actually shows that we do not look at the actual number on this thing. What matters is whether it looks like a nominative plural subject. So I will probably stop here to have some time for the questions. I mean, we also do some experiments on case agreement, but yeah, instead of kind of trying to squeeze them in the remaining several minutes, I will better leave time for questions. Julia.
My question might be really stupid, but still, since you were telling us about masculine as unmarked in Russian, have you somehow measured the frequency of your stimuli during the experiment? Since it, well, from my point of view, it might be significant if we are taking only extremely frequent feminine stimuli and extremely, well, less frequent masculine stimuli. Might it be somehow?
Yeah, we actually checked that the frequency of the actual words we were using as stimuli does not matter. So actually, initially, we were trying, yeah, kind of the core of the study. In the core of the study, we are trying not to compare, say, masculine and feminine attractors. We are trying to compare, say, you have a structure like masculine head, feminine attractor, verb in masculine or in feminine. And it's the same verb. Will the mistake be visible or not, and at what stage, at what region in the sentence? Then say feminine head, masculine attractor, then right verb, wrong verb. At what stage the mistake will be visible? So we were like the core facts. We were trying not to compare different nouns. We were trying to compare like correct and incorrect sentences depending on the gender of the head and of the attractor. So, but then we also made some additional comparisons between these conditions. Say comparing masculine, feminine, and then the two type of verbs, correct and incorrect, to say masculine, the two type of verbs, correct and incorrect. And when we did that, we made additional statistical tests to see that the frequencies of our stimuli do not matter here. Yeah. So, and when I say that masculine is most frequent in Russian, then feminine, then neuter, say, Fedorova and Yanovich did some counts on the national corpus of Russian, and they rely on this information, and there are some other sources where people counted nouns from different sources, and they all arrive at the same conclusion that masculine is the most frequent, then comes feminine, and then neuter is rather infrequent compared to these two other genders. Any other questions? Yeah, Eric?
Yeah, I have a question about this contrast that you find between, let's say, number marking and gender marking. So, but if I say summarize it, say very informally, what you find is that the effects of number marking are relatively robust, whereas in the case of gender marking, you find far more scattered pattern. But in your summary, you say, well, it's basically the case that we have several, say, marking hierarchies.
No, I wouldn't say that. Gender markedness effects are less robust. So the differences in the number of mistakes is similar. So the only thing that I wanted to say that it's less obvious what should be marked here. Okay. So in case of number, it's obvious that plural is marked like whatever scale you take. In case of gender, it's less obvious, but actually I was expecting. Because we did like experiments simultaneously with Anton and with Yulia, and Yulia was working on number agreement and Anton was working on gender agreement. I expected that we will have more mistakes with number than with gender. I mean, just like informal comparison across experiments. It's not the case. Yeah, that's not the case.
but it's important to say that there were, say, possibly more than one markedness hierarchy.
Yeah, yeah. But wherever it's like some markedness hierarchy shows itself, apparently, it gives you very robust effects.
Okay.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the fact that you have in that domain more strategies, more hierarchies than in the number domain, I was wondering whether it could be related to the fact that in the case of number, we have, let's say, very clear, say in general, kind of very clear semantic effects. So number is a morphological marker associated with particular semantics if you read out in the case of gender, that is much less the case.
Yeah, in case of...
It would be interesting to see, to look, I don't know if such a language exists, in which on the one hand you have a very, say, rich morphology for expressing gender, let's say, markings, and on the other hand, in which natural gender plays a more, say, prominent role than, let's say, it does play a prominent role in particular markings which you select.
Yeah, I guess a great language to look at would be language with classifiers. So there the system is much more semantically transparent. For for those people who do not know what these classifiers are, there are languages that divide their nouns not saying neuter, masculine, feminine, or say masculine and feminine, or whatever gender system you can come up with, but they divide their nouns into like many classes. For example, in one class would go, I don't know, people, say men in one class, women in another class, in some other class will go sharp and dangerous objects, and so on and so forth. This system is also not absolutely semantically transparent. They never are. So there are always some cases where these features are formal, just formal features. But at least these systems are much more semantically transparent, and classifiers are much more, have much more semantic motivation behind them than our gender system. Because in our gender system, actually, the semantic distinction is present only if you look at people. Even if we look at animals, say собака is feminine, dog is feminine in Russian, собака. But you can call собака whatever dog. It's Russian has specific words for female and male dogs. But they're used as swear words more often, as Russian speakers know. But the neutral words are собака, feminine, and пес, masculine, another word for собака, another word for dog, sorry. And there is no difference, like you can call a dog пес, masculine, or собака, feminine, and it doesn't depend on the actual, sex of the dog. So, the system is semantically non-transparent. And I actually thought that it would play a role in the number of mistakes. But apparently it doesn't. And it shows that these mistakes are formal and have kind of little to do with semantics. Julia?
Yes, I have one more question. As far as I understood, you only look to the verb to be in Russian and also in English. Is it somehow
important?
Yeah.
So we looked only at the verb to be and like adjectives, just to make kind of all conditions the same. Of course, it would be interesting to look at other verbs. And actually what we know from studies of English, as I tried to show in the introduction, that some people actually were able to show that it plays a role how well the verb combines with this potential intervener. Because Anton and Julia and myself, regrettably, we do not have an infinite amount of time to look at these interesting things. So we just chose to look at the things that you can do in Russian and that you can't do in many other languages that were studied and that haven't been done in other languages. Yeah.